Hi, I'm Holly Robichaud with U.S. Term Limits, and today we are glad to have Kevin Coughlin with us, involved with to be our Ohio State Chair. He's got some big shoes to fill with former, now U.S. Senator Bernie Moreno being a U.S. Senator, and so we're glad to have Kevin on board, taking up the helm, taking up the cause out there in Ohio. So glad you could join us today.
Thanks very much, Hallie.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I served for 14 years in the Ohio legislature, 4 years in the House, and 10 years in the Senate. And part of that was before term limits took effect in 2010, I guess that would have been, or what was it, 2000. And then much of it was after term limits took effect. So I saw both before and after. And of course, I've seen it since then in the 2 decades that we've had it here in Ohio. I left when I was at the end of my term limit. I went home. I started a business. I've been doing that for the last 15 years. And I ran for Congress last year in a very tough district, one of the closest districts in the country. Came up just a bit short, and climbed on board with U.S. term limits because there's no question that Congress is broken. And I was not always a term limits fan. I have to tell you, back in when I was in the legislature, I had all the usual arguments that you hear against it. But two things have happened. Number one, we've had over 2 decades in Ohio of experience with term limits, and the world is not upside down. We've got some very fine leaders. Things have moved forward. Ohio has continued to grow, and we've got new blood and a churn of new blood coming in, a new set of eyes and fresh eyes coming into the legislature. The second thing that's happened, in my view, is that particularly from the congressional campaign, came to the realization that, over the course of my lifetime, Congress has really been screwing up. They've been giving up all their power, partially because they're lazy, partially because they just don't want to do the work to the executive branch, and they've put us in this mess of indebtedness and overspending and lack of oversight over the bureaucracy. And these are the people that we believe are experienced. So I think maybe a little bit of that shock of bringing in new blood from time to time and forcing that would be a good thing for Congress.
Couldn't agree with you more. Do you think by implementing term limits on Congress, we'll be restoring the founding fathers' vision for our country?
Yeah, there's no question that there was if you look at the trajectory of their careers, they didn't spend a whole lot of time in the public office. They did what they needed to do, and then they returned home. And of course, George Washington set the ultimate example. Took a long time to enshrine that in the Constitution, and but of course, it came about the same way, using the same process that we are using here throughout the country with U.S. term limits. Um, uh, Moving toward a convention of states and forcing the 22nd Amendment, which we just celebrated the anniversary of this week, to limit the president's terms.
Yep. So I think I know the answer to this question, but Bernie Moreno, who ran for U.S. Senate and is now the senator, made term limits a big part of his campaign. So how do voters in Ohio feel about term limits?
Well, recent polling says almost 80% of Ohioans support term limits. And of course, it's in our Constitution in the state, so the voters weighed in loud and clear for our state legislatures, state legislators. Look, I think that there's no going back on term limits in Ohio. The experiment has worked well. People do not seem unhappy with it, and if anything, the support for term limits continues to grow in the polls.
That's great. So how do people get in touch with you and get involved with you?
Well, here in Ohio, we have two bills, two resolutions introduced in the State House. Senate Joint Resolution 6, sponsored by Teresa Gavarone and Jane Timken, and House Joint Resolution 3, which is sponsored by Heidi Workman over in the House. These are concurrent resolutions. We would like to get them passed through the legislature this year so that we can add to that list of states that are calling for a convention of the states for term limits for Congress. And I would ask people in Ohio to contact their state legislators and urge them to pass the congressional term limit resolutions that have been introduced.
Well, I know with you at the helm that Ohio is going to probably be the next state that joins the growing list of states calling for congressional term limits. Couldn't be more pleased to have you on board and filling those big Bernie Marino shoes. So, so glad to have you on board.
Looking forward to fighting with you. Thanks.
Thank you.